Hello again, Woodlands. So we are on chapter 7 of the fantastic Mr Fox, and this chapter is called We'll Never Let Him Go. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Bean switched off the motor of his tractor and climbed down from the driver's seat. Bunce did the same. Both men had had enough. They were tired and stiff from driving the tractors all day. They were also hungry. Slowly, they walked over to the small fox's hole in the bottom of the huge crater. Bean's face was purple with rage. Bunce was cursing the fox with dirty words that cannot be printed. Boggis came waddling up. "Dang and blast that filthy, stinking fox," he said. "What the heck do we do now?" "I'll tell you what we don't do," Bean said. "We don't let him go." "We'll never let him go," Bunce declared. "Never, never, never," cried Boris. "Did you hear that, Mr Fox?" yelled Bean, bending low and shouting down the hole. "It's not over yet, Mr Fox. We're not going home till we've strung you up dead as a dingbat." Whereupon the three men all shook hands with one another and swore a solemn oath that they would not go back to their farms until the fox was caught. "What's the next move?" asked Bunce, the pot-bellied dwarf. "We're sending you down the hole to fetch him," said Bean. "Down you go, you miserable midget." "Not me!" screamed Bunce, running away. Bean made a sickly smile. When he smiled, you saw his scarlet gums. You saw more gums than teeth. "Then there's only one thing to do," he said. "We starve him out. We camp here day and night, watching the hole. He'll come out in the end. He'll have to." So Boggis and Bunce and Bean sent messages down to their farms asking for tents, sleeping bags and supper. Chapter 8. The foxes begin to starve. That evening, 3 tents were put up in the crater on the hill. One for Boggis, one for Bunce and one for Bean. The tents surrounded Mr Fox's hole, and the 3 farmers sat outside their tents eating their supper. Boggis had boiled 3 chickens and smothered them in dumplings. Bunce had 6 doughnuts filled with disgusting goose liver pate, and Bean had 2 gallons of cider. All 3 of them kept their guns beside them. Boggis picked up a steaming chicken and held it close to the foxhole. "Can you smell this, Mr Fox?" he shouted. "Lovely tender chicken. Why don't you come up and get it?" The rich scent of chicken wafted down the tunnel to where the foxes were crouching. "Oh, Dad," said one of the small foxes, "couldn't we just sneak up and snatch it out of his hand?" "Don't you dare," said Mrs Fox. "That's just what they want you to do." "But we're so hungry," they cried. "How long will it be until we get something to eat?" Their mother didn't answer them, nor did their father. There was no answer to give. As darkness fell, Bunce and Bean switched on the powerful headlamps of the 2 tractors and shone them on the hole. "Now," said Bean, "we'll take it in turn to keep watch. 1 watches while 2 sleep, and so on, all through the night." Boggis said, "What if the fox digs a hole right through the hill and comes out on the other side? You didn't think of that one, did you?" "Of course I did," said Bean, pretending he had. "Go on then, tell us the answer," said Boggis. Bean picked something small and black out of his ear and flicked it away. "How many men have you got working on your farm?" he said. 35, Boggis said. "Well, I've got 36, Bunce said. "Well, I've got 37, Bean said. "That makes 108 men altogether. We must order them to surround the hill. Each man will have a gun and a flashlight. There will be no escape for them for Mr Fox." So the order went down to the farms, and that night 108 men formed a tight ring around the bottom of the hill. They were armed with sticks and guns and hatchets and pistols and all sorts of other horrible weapons. This made it quite impossible for a fox, or indeed for any other animal, to escape from the hill. The next day, the watching and waiting went on. Boggis and Bunce and Bean sat upon small stools, staring at the fox's hole. They didn't talk much. They just sat there with their guns on their laps. Every so often, Mr Fox would creep up a little closer toward the mouth of the tunnel and take a sniff. Then he would creep back again and say, "They're still there." "Are you quite sure?" Mrs Fox would ask. "Positive," said Mr Fox. "I can smell that man Bean a mile away. He stinks." Chapter 9. Mr Fox has a plan. For 3 days and 3 nights this waiting game went on. "How can a fox go without food or water?" Boggis asked the 3rd day. "Not much longer now," Bean told him. "He'll make a run for it soon. He'll have to." Bean was right. Down in the tunnel, the foxes were slowly but surely starving to death. "If only we could just have a tiny sip of water," said one of the small foxes. "Oh, Dad, can't you do something?" "Couldn't we make a dash for it, Dad? We'd have a little bit of a chance, wouldn't we?" "No chance at all," snapped Mrs Fox. "I refuse to let you go up there and face those guns. I'd sooner you stayed down here and died in peace." Mr Fox had not spoken for a very long time. He had been sitting quite still, his eyes closed, not even hearing what the others were saying. Mrs Fox knew that he was trying desperately to think of a way out, and now, as she looked at him, she saw him stir himself and get slowly to his feet. He looked back at his wife. There was a little spark of excitement dancing in his eyes. "What is it, darling?" said Mrs Fox. "Oh, I've just had a bit of an idea," Mr Fox said carefully. "What?" they cried. "Oh, Dad, what is it?" "Come on," said Mrs Fox. "Tell us quickly." "Well," said Mr Fox. Then he stopped and sighed and sadly shook his head. He sat down again. "It's no good," he said. "It won't work after all." "Why not, Dad?" "Because it means more digging. And we aren't any, there is, and we aren't any of us strong enough for that after 3 days and nights without food." "Yes, we are, Dad," cried the small foxes, jumping up and running to their father. "We can do it. You see if we can't. So can you." Mr Fox looked at the 4 small foxes and he smiled. "What fine children I have," he thought. "They're all starving to death and they haven't had a drink for 3 days, but they're still undefeated. I must not let them down." I suppose we could give it a try," he said. "Let's go, Dad. Tell us what you want us to do." Slowly, Mrs Fox got to her feet. She was suffering more than any of them from the lack of food and water. She was very weak. "I'm so sorry," she said, "but I don't think I'm going to be much help." "You stay right where you are, my darling," said Mr Fox. "We can handle this by ourselves." Chapter 10. Boggis's Chicken House number 1. "This time we must go in a very special direction," said Mr Fox, pointing sideways and downwards. So he and his 4 children started to dig once again. The work went much more slowly now, yet they kept at it with great courage, and little by little the tunnel began to grow. "Dad, I wish you would tell us where we are going," said one of the children. "Well, I dare not do that," said Mr Fox, "because this place I'm hoping to get to is so marvellous that if I described it to you now, you would go crazy with excitement. And then, if we failed to get there, which is very possible, you would die of disappointment, and I don't want to raise your hopes up too much, my darlings." For a long, long time, they kept on digging. For how long, they did not know, because there were no days and no nights down there in the murky tunnel. But at last, Mr Fox gave the order to stop. "I think," he said, "we had better take a peep upstairs now and see where we are. I know where we want to be, but I can't possibly be sure where we are and if we're near it." Slowly and wearily, the foxes began to slope the tunnel upwards towards the surface, up and up it went, until suddenly they came to something hard above their heads, and they couldn't go up any further. Mr Fox reached up to examine this hard thing. "It's wood," he whispered. "Wooden planks." "What does that mean, Dad?" "It means, unless I'm very much mistaken, that we are right underneath somebody's house," whispered Mr Fox. "Be very quiet now while I take a peek." Carefully, Mr Fox began pushing up one of the floorboards. The board creaked most terribly, and they all ducked down, waiting for something awful to happen. Nothing did, so Mr Fox pushed up a second board, and then, very, very cautiously, he poked his head up through the gap. He let out a shriek of excitement. "I've done it!" he yelled. "I've done it first time! I've done it! I've done it!" He pulled himself up through the gap in the floor and started prancing and dancing with joy. "Come on up," he sung. "Come on up and see where you are, my darlings. What a sight for a hungry fox! Hallelujah! Hooray!" The 4 small foxes scrambled up out of the tunnel, and what a fantastic sight it was that now met their eyes. They were in a huge shed, and the whole place was teeming with chickens. There were white chickens and brown chickens and black chickens by the 1,000. "Boggis' chicken house #1, cried Mr Fox. "It's exactly what I was aiming at. I hit it slap in the middle, first time. Isn't that fantastic? And, if I say so myself, rather clever." The small foxes went wild with excitement. They started running around in all directions, chasing the stupid chickens. "Wait," ordered Mr Fox. "Don't lose your heads. Stand back, calm down. Let's do this properly. First of all, everyone have a drink of water." They all ran over to the chicken's drinking trough and lapped up at the lovely cool water. Then Mr Fox chose 3 of the plumpest hens, and with a clever flick of his jaw, he killed them instantly. "Back to the tunnel," he ordered. "Come on. No fooling around. The quicker you move, the quicker you shall have something to eat." One after another, they climbed down through the hole in the floor, and soon they were all standing once again in the dark tunnel. Mr Fox reached up and pulled the floorboards back into place. He did this with great care. He did it so that no one could tell they had ever been moved. "My son," he said, giving the 3 plump hens to the biggest of his 4 small children, "run back with these to your mother. Tell her to prepare a feast. Tell her the rest of us will be along in a jiffy as soon as we've made a few other little arrangements." I'll read to you again soon.